Well, we're here in the Red Line Report studios again this week, and this week we're going to be talking about the NHL entry draft that's coming up in Montreal next week. We're going to be talking a little bit about the top end of the draft, and then we're going to be talking about a few late risers up the draft charts. First of all, a lot of people have asked me if I think there's going to be a lot of trades at the top end of the draft. That's always a big issue with fans. They want to know if their teams are going to make a lot of big deals come draft day, and it's always a day, for movers and shakers, and it's always a very exciting day. You want to see how your team is going to be shaped for the next few years. I would preface it by saying I don't really see a ton of deals at the top end of the draft this year. I don't think that the New York Islanders specifically are going to move that top pick. They have a choice between three really good players in Victor Hedman if they want to go with a big defenseman, potential franchise defenseman for the next 15 years, or they could choose from the two Ontario League forwards, Matt Duchene or John Tavares, if they want to go for offense. So I think there's too much value at the top end of the draft for the Islanders to make a deal and deal down out of that first pick. They want to make a big splash with their fans. And there's some really good value at the top end, some marquee players. After that, there's been some speculation about Tampa Bay maybe trading the number 2 overall pick. I don't really see that happening, but one thing that could entice them, I think, is if Chuck Fletcher, the new GM in Minnesota, would be willing to, move a guy like Marian Gaborik. Obviously, Marian Gaborik has had a somewhat contentious relationship with the previous management group in Minnesota, has at various times perhaps wanted out of Minnesota. I think if Tampa Bay could get Gaborik in a deal and maybe Minnesota's 12th overall pick, that might free them up perhaps to move some of the money that either Vinny Lecavalier or Martin St. Louis are making now, and open the way for potentially a floodgate of deals involving Tampa Bay, big deals involving Tampa Bay, with some big names as I just mentioned, Lecavalier, Martin St. Louis. That could open the floodgates there. There's been a lot of speculation about the LA Kings dealing, but I think LA is going to probably wait and figure out exactly what's going to drop down to them at their position. But I think one of the things holding back the deals this year is that there's a fairly well-delineated grouping of the top 7 or 8 prospects in this year's draft, and at least the perception is that there's a fairly steep drop-off after those top 7 or 8 guys. So I don't think that too many of the teams who are drafting in that range, in the top 7 or 8, are going to really be willing or really want to move down out of those top 7 or 8 picks and go back into the third tier of prospects. So I think that's one of the things that's going to be holding back some of the deals at the top end. Now I'd like to move into talking a little bit about some of the late risers, guys who have been moving up the draft charts late. And this is somewhat predicated on the NHL Scouting Combine that was held in Toronto about 2 weeks ago. And some players like John Moore, the big defenseman out of Indianapolis. Moore is a guy who everybody sees as a potential home run type pick. Used to be a forward and still plays defense like a forward in that he moves up into the play a lot and really brings a lot to the offensive game, skates beautifully, he's a terrific skater, likes to aggressively force the play at the offensive end. So he's a guy that's really been moving up the charts, could potentially even crack the top 10. Scott Glennie, another player in that category, was highly rated until he injured his elbow and missed a lot of time in the second half of the season, but came back and really played well for Brandon alongside Braden Shen in the playoffs, really proved he was healthy again, and a really solid all-around player, very complete. There's no real weaknesses to his game. He did very well in the interview process at the Scouting Combine. So I think Scott Glennie is going to move up the charts, probably potentially get picked as early as the early teens, somewhere in the 12 to 14 range. I think Ethan Werrick is another player who did well in terms of his private workouts with teams after the combine, in terms of measuring his skating stride, and it looks like he's really improved and picked up a half step on his stride in the last 4 or 5 months. It's been quite evident as he's been working with a power skating instructor and has really done some work and done some homework on improving and picking up his wheels a little bit. and I think that's going to stand him in good stead on draft day, probably even push him up into the back end of the first round. Chris Kreider is another player who's kind of a bit of a wild card, probably the second best skater in the draft, next to Magnus Svensson-Pajärvi, the big Swede, or Magnus Pajärvi Svensson, sorry. So Kreider has been kind of a wild card because he played at a lower level of competition, played in the New England prep school ranks, but I think some teams are trying to steal him, sandbagging a little bit. He's probably, based on what he did this year and because of the fact that it's a little bit more difficult to gauge the level of competition he was playing against, a lot of teams have him ranked in the early to mid-20s, but I think there will be at least one or two teams that will be willing to step up and either make a deal for him or take him with their own pick in the mid-teens. And it wouldn't surprise me to see Kreider go as high as 14, 15 or thereabouts, just because of that really great size and skating combination he's got. The last player I want to mention in terms of late risers is a tiny little defenseman from Finland named Sami Vatanen. Vatanen is a 5'9" defenseman who's only 159 pounds, the kind of guy who as recently as 5 or 6 years ago wouldn't even be considered at all, pretty much at any point in the draft, even though back then the draft was 9 rounds. But at 5'9", 159 pounds, he can be a real difference maker. He throws his body around recklessly. Reminds me of when I first saw 10 years ago Nicholas Kronwall, who at the time was a 5'11", 165-pound defenseman with no meat on his bones, but would just fly around the rink and throw his body, just hurtle into anything that moved. And that's kind of the way Vatanen plays the game, even though he's only 5'9", 159 pounds. He gets hammered every shift out there, but he comes back stronger every single time. He has some really good offensive skills, can really skate and move the puck. So I think Sami Vatanen is a guy who, even at 5'9", 159 pounds, playing on the back end of the blue line, he could conceivably go as high as the second round, which, for a kid that small on the back end, that would be a really nice little move for him towards the end of the draft. And that's what we see coming up at the top end of the draft and some late risers. We'll be back a little bit later on in the week to talk about a few guys who maybe fell based on the scouting combine, and also perhaps a few surprise high picks who might sneak their way into the first round.